Thank you for joining us today. I'm Rhonda Thomas with Truth in Education. We're excited to have our guest speaker tonight, Peg Luksik. She is a wife, a grandmother. Peg has been an educator for over 40 years. She graduated from Clarion University with the ability to teach both mainstream and special education children. While in graduate school, she worked in the university's psychometric testing clinic. She has taught in every level from preschool through college, written and evaluated curriculum, trained teachers, and hosted a nationally syndicated television program on education issues. For several years, she was a consultant with the U.S. Department of Education as a grant reviewer to evaluate education reform initiatives. She served as an advisor to President Reagan's Commission on the Family, working especially with issues concerning single moms. She is currently the host of pegluksik.online, which is where you can find her, and we'll repeat that again at the end. But we are so grateful to have you, Peg. Thank you for joining. Tonight, we're going to discuss with Peg, the broader K-12 data collection through apps, surveys, assessments, and learning platforms, including mindfulness programs. In fact, Katie Allen, our policy advisor, has written a white paper on mindfulness, and you can find that at our website, truthineducation.org. So Peg, before we get started, I think it's very important that you share a little bit about the history of the data collection, how you got involved with this, and where we are today.
Data collection has a very long history in education. It goes back into the 70s, 80s, 90s. And it's funny, they're now calling it K through 12, but the actual system inside the government register is called a P through 20 system, with P being preschool, K through 12 being what you think, 12 through 16 being college, and then 20 is everything after that. So the goal was and is to create a womb to tomb data profile of the individual that includes not just educational data, but data about their family's history, their health history, their financial records. There's observations from like preschool teachers and daycare workers. All kinds of data has been collected on the kids. The federal government, back when they did Race to the Top, when Obama was president, actually required in the contracts that the states maintain individual level data and then share it with the federal government. And if you go to the U.S. Department of Labor and you look up the Workforce Data Quality Initiative, you'll find that the educational data is being seamlessly integrated with the labor force data to create that womb to tomb profile of the children. So they've been at this for a very, very, very long time. And people, they tell you it's anonymous, but it's not, because of the way that they collect the data points, the way they correlate the data points, how they integrate the systems. Let me give you an example. In the 80s, they asked for teachers to volunteer to implement some of the new kinds of programming, and they told the teachers they were anonymous. What they didn't tell the teachers was that the school district was submitting the social security numbers of the teachers who volunteered, and that the government then could use the social security number to access that teacher's entire record. The teacher didn't give them the social security number, but the school district did. And so they had the data, even though they told the teachers they were anonymous. So it's been a very long-standing process, and they're very, very careful, and they're very comprehensive in how they look to get the data and then pull it together.
And now we see that with the U.S. Department of Education being dismantled, a lot of that went under the Department of Labor.
Really, what we're seeing, and you hesitate because a lot of times the political side of the government doesn't have a real understanding of what's happening on the bureaucratic side. So people can think they're doing a good thing and not be. And on the other hand, people can think they're doing a bad thing and miss the mark. In this case, I think intentions on the political side are generally honorable, but the implementation is actually opening doors that were created years ago and inside the bureaucracy. And so when you've been at it for a long time and you've looked at it, it's hard not to see the patterns that are emerging. And the goal has always been a womb to tomb data system, and that's where they're moving, and they continue to move there.
You're right. And I agree with you. There are a lot of good people that have no clue what they're doing. And I would say teachers, right? A
Right.
lot of people involved in this that don't have a clue where it's going. So that's what's so important about having someone that has the history that you do, Peg. What are the most common methods used? And we're kind of focusing on K through 12, but we realize this goes beyond K through 12. What are the methods that are used in K through 12 in gathering all this data through surveys and student behavioral tracking, biometric inputs, all of that that's taking place in our schools? How is that working and syncing with school data? And what are the risks that are involved with that?
It becomes almost impossible to track because since the data is coming in, for example, your school probably, most school districts have a school lunch program, and they ask the parents to fill out forms, and they're told, well, if your mom doesn't fill out the form, you won't get a little star on your paper or whatever. And the forms on their face seem innocuous, but they ask for your family income level. They ask job records. They ask how many people are in your home. And all of that then becomes part of the data package that surrounds that child. I remember once I was talking to an official from a Department of Education in a state who said, we're not collecting this data. And I said, but you are. We all know you are. And she finally admitted, well, all the data is in one data file and the student's name is in another data file. And I just laughed out loud. Like, if you know how old and a birth date and an address, I can find you. I don't need your name. I can find you no matter where you are. And so what they're doing is they're collecting, but then telling parents, well, they're separating the name from the data. But every time you fill out a form, every time your child uses an app or an iPad, anything that's electronic inside the classroom, that data is collected. Those are all integrated into the system, and all of that data gets collected by the school system and then sent on to the state, the feds, and then you have third-party research groups, you have vendors that can purchase the data and use the data. Ask yourself, I don't know if your listeners ever have been on Facebook, but you are looking at an ad on Facebook and you haven't even finished looking at it, and you're getting an advertisement for something else that matches that ad. Or you're looking at a story and then all of a sudden you have an advertisement for that or another story that matches it. How did they know that fast? Because they're collecting data in real time. Well, the same thing is happening at the educational level. And kids aren't particularly cognizant of keeping private things private. They tend to just, if you ask, they're going to tell you. Now, they may not tell you the truth, especially little boys. They tend to make themselves sound a lot worse than they are because they think it's cool, but they will tell you. And that's part of the danger of this, is that you get lots of data, but it may or may not be accurate. It may or may not be correlated to reality. And that is something that people aren't aware of because they don't even know that the data is being collected.
That's correct. And the other thing is all these Chromebooks have IP addresses, right?
They
So
do.
really there's no way it could be anonymous because they could track that IP address anytime that they want to.
Exactly.
Yes.
And now so many of the lessons themselves are online, so they can track how long did you take, how long did you look at that lesson, how much attention did you pay to that lesson, did you go along with the mindset of the lesson? And so much of what is now presented to the kids is, although it looks like education, it's really indoctrination in a way that they don't recognize it, so their privacy sensors aren't up or their discernment sensors aren't up. Let me give you an example. Years ago, it was the Pearson Company, actually, and in their reading book, they said, it was talking about Chaucer. And in the story about Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, it began by saying, and in Chaucer's day, women weren't taught to read. Well, that's true. They weren't. Neither were men. There was no printing presses. So nobody was actually taught to read. The knights thought reading was a feminine skill, so they hired scribes who were like a lesser, and that's who did the reading. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't actually know that. So it was the impression is, see, women were discriminated against. No, nobody learned to read in those days because there wasn't anything to read. There were no printing presses. So it's a way to misconstrue or misrepresent, and the kids just swallow it because it's underneath something else.
Yes, yes, I agree. And there is a lot of indoctrination going on. Integrations with tools like learning management systems, statewide longitudinal data systems, are rostering services like Clever. How does all that enable the automatic collection of comprehensive student profiles? And the data becomes that sensitive data, right? Like mental health indicators from surveys.
The federal government has a thing called the National Center for Education Statistics. And inside that, it's a complete sort of a table of this is all the stuff we want to collect, and it fills in all the blanks. So as information gets collected, it's almost as if there's a matrix there that we can just plug in the information as it goes. They don't have to build the matrix. It already exists. And now they're just plugging data in to the matrix that's already there, rounding out what information they have on that child based on every single place that they collect data. So every survey that child fills out, every form a parent fills out, every teacher evaluation, all of that rolls together into a database that's monstrous and has existed now for at least 30 years.
And now we have AI bots
Yeah.
getting involved and collecting
better.
data. That's even better, and parents have no clue. What passive data collection techniques occur, and we may have already talked about a lot of this in K through 12, such as background monitoring and device usage or location data. And the other thing is there's a cybersecurity risk that's involved with all of that. I actually attended a Brain Institute webinar, and one of the things they said was the government is the worst about data leaks. So,
they're awful. They're awful.
Yeah.
My husband and I are on Social Security, and we just got a notice that, this many millions of your numbers were leaked, and we're going to let you do one of the credit Experian things, for free because your data has all been breached. The government is probably the leakiest data collection agency that there is, partly because the system is a conglomeration of a whole bunch of little pieces that have been built together over decades, and partly because there's so many users. It's almost impossible to manage when you have that many individual users all trying to access data at the same time, who all have different levels of competency and training. And so it's a sieve. The problem is when parents go in and say, I want to see what's collected on my child, you almost never get to see what's there, not because the school district is lying, because they really don't know. They honestly do not know everything that's being collected. I debated once the Secretary of Education and said about the information management system, and she looked at me and said, no, there isn't one. Here's the 3 volumes that are each 500 pages long of the information that you're collecting. Did you want to rethink your answer? Like, look, this is what you're collecting. But the local person, they don't know that. Like, it feeds into these bigger systems, but it's almost impossible. Then you can't monitor it, you can't track it. And so many of the legal protections have absolute ridiculous exemptions for research or vendors, for educational purposes, which is, I want to make money off of you. That's an educational purpose. So you lose control of your child's data in so many of these instances, which is kind of scary.
It is kind of scary. So that brings in public-private partnerships, doesn't it? And when they get involved, then you are really losing control because we don't know where all that data goes. And now with the mental health, the school-based health clinics in our schools, all that data is being used for research. So it just can go anywhere. But I think one of the things that we found lately in hearing from parents, of course, is that a lot of these curricula or mindfulness platforms, whatever they are, they're copyrighted. So you can't even.
So it's an excuse that you can't see it, right? It's an excuse that you can't see it. Understand, Any attempt by a school system, public or private, to interact with the emotions of the children is definitionally manipulation.
Mhm.
Emotions aren't rational. If they were, we'd call them thoughts. So they're not controllable. And when we have programs that attempt to control them, you put children in boxes that they can't get out of. And so there's no way to predict how any given child will react to that program because you can't control what they bring to the table in their life or even on that day. You can't control the reactions of the other children. I've sat in seminars where they're like, well, it's like a group therapy session. Well, no registered psychiatrist on the planet would help a group therapy session with 30 unrelated individuals. Like, you only put them in a group after you've qualified them and they all are working on the same thing and you have control. This is a total uncontrolled situation. And we're seeing that act out with kids being put in situations they aren't ready to deal with that emotion or analyze it. We're activating emotions that they're not ready for. We're creating stress and anxiety and angst, and then basically creating the problem that now these companies are trying to solve. But they made the problem in the first place.
They did intentionally, I would say. So
Sadly.
and we have a psychiatrist that we work with, and he made mention of social emotional learning and how he is seeing the effects of that in his office. He believes it's so harmful that you should pull your children and homeschool them because it is psychological manipulation. And
It
when you
is.
combine that with mindfulness, with PBIS, and all the things restorative justice that are in the school, it's all one big platform really being used for the same
Yes.
purpose.
Same
So,
purpose. And
yes.
it's really, when you do this with children, it's funny. I once was asked to evaluate social emotional learning. It was they had done like a big meta-analysis. And when the parents said, well, how do these programs work? The company promoting it said, here we did this meta-analysis, and we looked at 230 studies, and this is just wonderful. And the parents called me and said, how do we fight that? And I said, well, give it to me. So I looked up the 230 studies. I actually went back and looked up the original studies. Well, about half of them were on children ages 6 to 10. And of them, about half of them evaluated their program based on the opinion of the children who took the program. I said, so we're basing educational policy on the opinions of people who still believe in Santa Claus and think that's a good idea. And that's exactly what's happening. In some cases, it helped academic learning. They didn't even monitor academic learning. They didn't even look at it. They didn't study it at all. That long-term effects, manipulating emotions is a very serious endeavor. Part of my background, I worked with emotionally disturbed children, and those are children that you really do have to manipulate their emotions to get them. I worked with autistic children and children who had aggression issues, and you need to proceed extremely cautiously because you can so easily do more harm than good. These programs manipulate at a group level the emotions of children who are not in the same place. Even if they're in the same classroom, in any given classroom, the mental age range of the children, even though they're chronologically 8, can be 5 to 10. And so you have no idea how they are receiving the information. And the teachers are not trained psychiatrists, nor should they be. That wasn't supposed to be their role. So they don't know how to evaluate when they're doing harm. They don't know how to move forward with something that's good because all they know is what it says on the paper. And when you deal with the emotional aspects of a child, that is an incredibly complicated area where you can do so much harm without knowing what you're doing. And we're doing that. And we're seeing the results of that with children who have suicide rates up, drug use up, self-destructive behaviors, cutting themselves is up, alcoholism is up, sexual activity is up. Like, the kids are responding, unfortunately, predictably, but negatively.
Yes. Yes. And I believe a lot of that is there's no boundaries within these schools. So the
No, they're
children, God created us for boundaries. And when you don't have boundaries, especially as a child, you don't know what's expected of you. There's a lot that happens there. And so it is very destructive. How do you ensure that we feel like FERPA has been relaxed some? What is your view on that? And how do you ensure that data usage complies with FERPA exceptions for third-party vendors?
You
And
don't.
you don't, yeah.
The answer is you don't.
Mhm.
It's been relaxed to the point where it's almost meaningless, and there is really not a way for a parent to insist or ensure, because once that data enters the data collection point, you don't have control of it anymore. It's not a piece of paper that you can go in and say, well, give it back to me.
Right.
It's gone. It's been transmitted. I agree with your friend, the psychiatrist. Take your kids out. Remove them from the reach of the school system. That is really the only way to protect them. Once they're inside it, you cannot control what's happening. You can sign all the forms you want. They will find a way around them. And once it enters the matrix, you cannot control where it goes.
And
I mean, think of just
yes,
yourself, how many times you contributed to one charity and now you get from 10 other charities that you never heard of. How come? Because that one sold your name.
right. And they're
And
selling our children, they're monetizing our children's data.
they
How
are.
how
Yes.
many data points do you believe they're collecting on our children, Peg?
Oh, at this point, there's literally thousands of them.
Yeah.
The database is thousands of pages and lines long, and it
Mhm.
includes anything you can possibly think of.
And I don't know if parents realize they're not just collecting data on the students, they're collecting it on the families too, through the students.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
You
So
know, some
all of
of the
that,
monitoring the background of your house, like, you know, when you turn on the child turns on their iPad or whatever it is, that computer can see what's behind you. So
mhm,
they can monitor, and there are documented instances, for example, during COVID, where people showed up at the doors of children because even though they were in their home, on the wall behind them was a gun safe. And so, oh, is there a gun in that home? That was none of your
mhm,
business. But
right.
in fact, there are documented cases where that in fact happened. So they are absolutely monitoring. And, you know, every single point that they can collect, they do. And parents, you know, I've watched parents be, oh, I just don't know why they're asking that question. Well, then don't answer it.
Right.
Well, you know, I mean, I guess they really need it. No, they don't. They don't
Mhm.
need it. Don't answer the question. But we have a generation that's conditioned to answer those questions. You know, they're the generation that grew up on Facebook telling everybody that they had pancakes for breakfast and pretzels for lunch. So they've been conditioned to share information, and so it's just they just do.
It's become normalized, hasn't it?
It has.
Unfortunately, parents, I don't think realize long term how that's going to affect their children
Right.
and in every part of their lives. So it's really important to protect our children. Where is all this K-12 data stored?
Huh. Um, I don't know. There's a number of different collection points. I know the feds have some, but at this point, I don't think there is one single. Well, I don't know of one single repository.
Mhm. What are the standard retention periods for data from apps and surveys? Does that ever go away? Can a parent
Now,
go in and request it be expunged or
you
even
can go in, you
corrected?
can go in and request anything,
Yes,
but because you don't know where it went and you can't track it, it's
yes.
never gone. I have a friend who is a psychologist, and we were working on a project. It was a statewide. They wanted to do a survey of every student to see if they were depressed. And a friend of mine asked me to get involved, and I did, and did all the homework and went in and realized that this quote survey had been developed and was paid for by Pfizer, who of course sells antidepressant drugs. And in the course of putting together the package that ultimately made Pfizer stop, I spoke to a psychologist who said, yeah, this is how dangerous it is. He said, I am a registered psychologist. And years ago, I had a young lady who was like 13. There was a huge upheaval in her family, like a very tragic accident, multiple deaths. And she had a lot of trouble dealing with it at 13. And so he said she very responsibly sought help. to deal with this extremely traumatic situation when she was 13. And she did, and she was very successful. And as she's graduating from high school, she wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. And it showed up that she had sought mental health assistance when she was 13, and they denied her access. She was not allowed to enter the Air Force Academy. And he said that, but I thought that was supposed to be confidential, but it wasn't.
No,
So
it's
it never
shame.
goes away, and you have no control.
No control. And I will tell you, universal screenings is legal in most states. And if you do a universal screening, you don't have to have the parents' permission. You can
Right.
do it across the board. And so that is dangerous also. You don't have a clue what's going on within those schools for your children.
Right.
So I
And
agree. That
you have
is,
no, I always think it's funny. It's like, we're going to get this. I'm like, have you ever met a 13-year-old boy? Because if you ask him if he's ever engaged in high risk behaviors, he will think it's really funny to say yes to everything because he's a 13-year-old boy. A 13-year-old girl, even if she did, won't tell you.
that's
And
true.
so the screenings aren't true. It's like there's no way to verify the accuracy of the information that you're getting, but it enters this database as if it's the gospel truth that then follows that person through their life.
And quite honestly, Peg, the surveys that I've looked at, none of them are positive. They're all geared toward that child having mental health issues. And that data is then used and taken to our capitals for more money for these mental health organizations saying, look, it isn't getting better. We need more SEL. We need more of all of this. And I
Right.
actually have it was a board member in one of our counties in Georgia that contacted me because a teacher had shared with them a 10-question survey that the teacher herself had to fill out on the patient, it was like a patient, the student. And some of the questions were, do they lie? Do they cheat? Do they steal? It was nothing positive. And this teacher had to fill that out. Well, guess what? We have learned, and I don't know if this is the case here, but we are thinking it might be because you even brought it up earlier with Pfizer. There are short form tests for mental health that are created by the drug companies for people who are not qualified to give those tests, mental health tests. So for counselors like at school or pediatricians, well, every one of them are geared toward a certain medication.
Yes, they are.
So
There's no
yes,
place on the forms for you to say you're normal or
no,
that you're fine or that I had a good day today. Like there's no place for happy. It's always
yeah,
which, what kind of depression do you have? What are you struggling with? And all of them by drug companies who want to sell drugs. And so it's like, if, again, your psychiatrist friend is true. Pull them out because it's a system that is designed to treat children as patients and as consumers. And some of those mental health drugs, once you get on them, you can't get off. So
yeah.
you're creating a lifelong customer.
Well, and what have we always heard, like you said earlier about the military? If you have a mental health issue, you can't own a gun. So
Right.
all these children are being labeled with something that falls under mental health. So there's
Yes.
so many effects from this that we just don't even think down the road what's going to happen. How do ed tech companies monetize K through 12 data, apps, and surveys? Is it sold? Is it to advertisers or researchers?
Yes. All of
Okay.
the above. They use it for their own advertising purposes. They use it. They can sell it to researchers. They also can use it to develop products that will further advance the agenda. So there's a number of avenues that they and can and do use to monetize the data that they're collecting.
Mhm.
There really is not a limit on what they once they get it, you really don't have any control over what they do with it.
And we have all these data centers going in all our states, right,
Yes,
for a purpose. So parental rights really under FERPA and COPA, when it comes to all this data, are
don't
weak.
exist.
They don't
They don't exist.
exist. You're
No,
right.
they don't exist. And
So,
that's I think part of that is part of the reason why we're seeing such an explosion in homeschooling, as people are waking up and saying, wait a minute, I don't actually want you collecting all this information on my children. And the advertising that I'm seeing and the the kinds of content that comes back based on the information that you're collecting on my child is not healthy, and I don't like it. And so and because it's so leaky, unfortunately, now you have folks that are more immediately insidious in terms of grooming and making the children into prey, and we're seeing some of those things surface now. That those groups are very, very good at collecting and monetizing and analyzing data to identify a weak link, and then hurt that child. So it's a very children don't come with protective screens. And so it's very difficult to be able to protect them when the screens are removed by those who should be creating them.
Yes. And in fact, we're doing the opposite. When it comes to parental rights, they're out the window with this. Pretty much.
Pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
You lose control in terms of like curriculum is now online, which makes it hard for you to see the curriculum that your child sees. We're seeing some of the standardized testing now. It's been about 10 years. They're moving that toward, it's a computerized test where your answer to question 1 determines question 2. So 2 children sitting beside each other in the same classroom are not necessarily taking the same test, which means the data that the parent is receiving is kind of meaningless because you don't actually know what tests they took. You don't know what information they're getting. You don't know. There was one test, it was in, I believe, Delaware. And when I took it and realized what they were really testing was frustration levels, they weren't testing math. It was supposed to be a math test. But whether you got the correct math answer didn't matter. It mattered how many times you were willing to attempt the problem, because the computer algorithm didn't quite work right. So you had to keep trying to force it into what they were really testing was the frustration level of the child.
Right.
But nobody knew that.
And I think some of this data too is used. And again, I think there's good people in our schools that they do not get the full picture. But
Right.
Through those algorithms, they're pushing our children into a certain direction they want them to go in. And
Yes.
Yes. And so therefore, I've noticed this with a parent and her child, if your child is not going in the direction they want them to go in, which is collectivism and groupthink, then they pull them out and put them into a counseling circle. And so in those circles, that's kind of like the Delphi technique is it's pressure. It's pressure.
Yes.
That
It is
child.
absolutely pressure.
And they can't handle that.
No, they can't. And they shouldn't have to.
No.
And that's, over the years, I've had parents say, well, my kid is strong. Your kid is a kid. I don't care how strong they are. They don't stand up to grown-ups. And we don't put children on the front lines of battlefields for a reason. And this is a battlefield. So take your kids off the front line.
Actually, it's a war, I think, on our children. And I agree with you. And I've heard parents too say, and I think that they truly believe this, but that their child is Christian, they might make a difference in this environment. But God calls us, right? The people, when the entire environment is that way, and you're a child, we don't even send adults out into the mission field until they are have a strong foundation, a teaching, and we're putting them in our schools thinking they're going to make a difference when in fact it's actually harming them. So one of the things that we have been working on and bringing attention to is the mindfulness exercises in our school, because if you think about social emotional learning and what it's doing to destabilize our children, which is how the psychiatrist described it, they enter these schools on an unlevel playing field, and every day they experience trauma. Their best friend may think they're a girl instead of a boy. A boy goes into the girl's bathroom, so it's trauma. And he said all day long they're experiencing anxiety, and they can only manage that for so long. So that is what he's seeing in his office: is more cutting, more depression, more PTSD. So all of that is an issue. So now, though, you're going to take them. A lot of schools have meditation rooms. So now you're taking them into these meditation rooms and really clearing the slate. And it's not about God. It's about really eventually becoming your own God. Even though we're told it's secular when it hits the school, it isn't. You cannot remove the spiritual roots from a religion. Anything, right? Anything. So we've got that going on. So with
the problem with the whole mindfulness thing is that children, especially younger children, are incapable of self-reflection. They can't step outside themselves and look at themselves. And that's kind of what we're asking them to do, except they can't. And so what you do then is you increase the anxiety level and you're giving them a, well, this is how you should feel. And again, I have a long background in special ed. And one of the big things that you learn is to say to people, because people will go, I shouldn't feel that way. Yeah, but you do. Well, no, because I shouldn't feel that way. But you do. And until you admit that you do, we can't cope with it. But children aren't capable of taking that step. So I shouldn't feel, you should love the person beside you. I don't know anybody other than the good Lord himself who loved everybody who was beside them. And most of the time, we don't like blah, blah, blah for no reason whatsoever. Like they just rub you the wrong way. Some people don't like fat people, thin people, tall people, short people, old people, young people. They're not rational. You just feel that way. And what we used to say to children was, okay, however you feel, you feel. You can't hit them. You got to be polite. You have to behave a certain way. But you feel what you feel. And with this whole mindfulness is we're telling them that there are preferred feelings, which is impossible. There are no such thing as preferred feelings. And as an adult, I can look at you and say, well, that's ridiculous. But a 7-year-old can't do that. And so then the 7-year-old internalizes, well, you told me I have to like little Susie Q over there, but I really don't. So I must be the bad person. And now you've added a layer of guilt. It actually harms them because it doesn't allow them to feel what they feel and then learn to control their behavior, which is the healthy way we deal with feelings. Instead, we attempt to manipulate their feelings, which really are not manipulatable. They still, there's some people are just prone to anger. Some people are prone to, they jump to conclusions. Some people are more passive. That's who you are. And you're allowed to be that way. And we now take that away from them, that there's a preferred way to feel. But that's a lie. But kids don't know it's a lie. And so when they don't measure up to the preferred way to feel, they internalize, I must be bad because the grown-up can't be wrong. So it must be me. And you've just destroyed the psyche of a kid.
And you're teaching them to self-censor, right?
Yes.
They're going to self-censor.
To trust themselves, to not believe themselves. And I must be the bad person here. And those feelings are normal and healthy. And you're allowed to have them. But the whole mindfulness thing attempts to create feelings. And children can't, since they can't evaluate the adult, they assume if they can't do it, the fault must be theirs.
Right.
And now we've damaged them. And that's why those programs, that's part of why those programs are so deadly, because they absolutely invade and destroy that internal psyche of the child, which eventually leads to a healthy self-image if allowed to grow. But if you destroy it when they're young, they don't trust themselves anymore. They don't feel confident in themselves. So now you've created someone who won't buck the system because they don't trust themselves.
Which is what we want. We want them to be obedient citizens, global citizens. I think that the next thing that I really want to talk about is now we have all these AI bots coming in, right? And a lot of those are surveillance based bots. They're actually ones, and they're in most of our schools. We're going to talk about this next month, but that are monitoring even after school emails, everything that's going on that computer. And parents do not realize that. Parents have never been given informed consent on any of this. And that is huge. That's our sovereignty over our own personal life and our data and our children.
Right. So. Right. And so it's again, it makes it so that you can't control, you can't limit because they're it's like Big Brother's always watching, except he is. And so you can't really limit what's happening. And it's important for parents to understand that. Um, keep your kid off social media as much as you possibly can.
Mhm. And that's one of the things we hear all the time. Well, they get it after school. Look at their phone. Look at this. But you know what? They spend probably around 2,000 hours a year in that school building, and maybe 800 with their parents. So
Uh-huh.
there is a huge difference in you with them after school. Whenever you're home from work, you have control over that. There's no control over it in these schools. There's no control over what they see. Everything is online now, so they can send them out to YouTube, to wherever they want them to go. And in fact, there is a school system in the US, I think it's Arizona, I need to go back and look, but they're using AI bots to teach all the core classes in K
Wow.
through. So it's already started, the removing of the teachers, the bringing in
Right.
of the AI. We have a school in Cobb County that uses virtual reality. Well, what can you not build a child's world
Right.
inside virtual reality glasses? So
Right.
our children are facing true dangers, I believe, that
Yes, I think so
parents
too.
are not aware of. That is really, as you said, all the psychological issues they're having. I don't think parents stop to think, oh, is there something going on within the school that is
Right.
causing this?
Well,
But they
one
really
time I had
don't.
a parent actually say to me, please don't tell me that there's something wrong in the schools, because everything else in life is such a challenge. I need to believe that my child is safe when they're there. And I'm like, well, I'm really sorry. But they're not. Like, I hate to tell you, but that's not what's happening. But people want to believe that the schools are safe and that their kids are safe there. And and I understand that makes you normal. And you should always give people permission to be normal, because they're going to be anyway. But in reality, the school is now an attack point, and they've been at it for a long time.
They have. And what we see too, and I believe we have a lot of good legislators that have no idea that a lot of the bills we're passing in our state capitals are
Right.
feeding this in a big way.
Yes. But
So,
they're like, this is a big problem and we have to fix it. Except
yes,
this isn't the fix. You're doing more of the same. Your kid's on a sugar high. Don't feed
yes,
them a pixie stick. Like,
that's
that's
right.
what we're doing. We're giving them pixie sticks while they're on sugar highs. This is more of the same. And so it's a very negative circle that everybody thinks they're helping, and they're
Right.
not.
And in reality, there's so many ways with what's happening within our schools and the bills that are being passed at our capitals that child services could come and take our children away like that. I
Yes.
mean, it is really set up in many ways that they would be that easy for them to come. And so we really need to start evaluating again our priorities or our
Yep.
children. And really, they're the only thing we leave behind in this world.
They
And
are.
you want them to be
And it
secure.
does mean that you have to be willing to make decisions that somehow will change your lifestyle,
Yes.
um, but will in fact protect your kids. Homeschooling, I'm happy to report, is just burgeoning across the country, but there needs to be more, because that is really the protection. And I've talked to so many parents who have told me, I didn't realize how bad it was until I got my kids home, because they didn't know to tell me that X, Y, Z, and Q. They thought that was normal. They didn't know that there was supposed to be something different, because they're children. They don't have anything to evaluate it against. And once I got them home and realized, wait, you what? But I had no idea that that was there. And in many cases, the kids are told, don't tell your parents, what happens in school stays in school. And so it's a whole, even when my kids were little, I can remember a guidance counselor sending home a note that said, I can keep secrets. And the next day I was in the school building saying, really? Who are you keeping secrets from? And what are they about? Oh, well, I didn't mean that. Well, yes, you did. And so my kids were not allowed in that program. It's like, no, they're never going to be in your room. We're not keeping any secrets from mom. That's not how this is happening. But now it's not enough to do that.
Mm-mm.
Now you actually have to remove them completely. And I will tell you, the families at homeschool are universally happier. Their kids read and write and count. They socialize just fine. It's a extremely positive experience all the way around. And by every metric, homeschool kids outperform any other variety in every single metric that exists.
I agree. I agree. So that is something that always I shoot for is I pray that every time we give a presentation or we share information, that it wakes a parent up, and we'll continue to educate as you are on what's happening in the schools, because there are children there that will be within those schools. So we can't do anything about that, I know, but we can certainly encourage people to really,
Yeah,
it's our, God gave that to us. We're supposed to be their main educators. And
we are.
so our worldview is a view that we want them to have. And unfortunately, in our schools now, it would never come
No,
near what we have.
right.
So, and they become what their teachers' view is really over time.
Over
So, and
time.
I attended a National School Counseling Association's conference. There were over 5,000 counselors there. And what you were saying is true. SEL teaches children that their counselor or their teacher is their trusted advisor. Well, that undermines the parent right away. And then
Right.
I was in a breakout session where this counselor literally said, if we can't use gender, we'll use nicknames. If we cannot talk about it, we will saturate our room in it. So that's another thing to look at is you cannot legislate the heart. And these people believe 100% in what they're doing, and they will die on that hill. So that's, you can't legislate that. I don't care how many
No.
bills pass. So it makes us feel good to think we're doing that. What should, if a parent were to go to a school board member and ask them um, about data and what contracts they have, what do you think the response would be for that parent?
I think the school board member honestly wouldn't know.
Okay.
Would be the probably the most response. I don't know. Maybe none. I can go and ask because they're not forthcoming with the data. And since the state requires the school district to submit data and the feds require the states to submit the data, the average local school board member doesn't even think about that as something that we're collecting, but it is.
So we have seen school boards flip to more conservative levels, but we see no change because I would say, based on even just what you said, our school board members don't have that much power anymore. It's been taken from them, and everything they're doing is coming down to them. And there's not that much they can do. What are your thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, I agree with you. It isn't that school board members are powerless in certain areas, but in
Right.
terms of data collection, they are, because
Yeah.
the Fed money comes in the form of contracts that the states have to sign. And in signing the contract, they must agree to provide the data, and they must agree that the school district will give the state the data. So it's a contractual obligation all the way up to the federal level that is not controllable at the school district level. So the school board member probably is unaware of it and definitely cannot stop it.
Right. I agree. Well, let's go one step further with all this data. What about the workforce pipeline? What is that looking like for our children?
There are a number of areas where things are starting to move. Some of it is, in some states, what we're seeing is, well, as the data is collected, your child is sort of funneled into a career path that's been pre-chosen for them. In Delaware, for example, I think it's called the Pathway to Success, and by 8th grade, they have to have it. And the documents actually say that parents can look at their child's plan, but they can't change it. In Georgia, it's like a I think there's like 10 choices or 5 choices in a menu, and you can maneuver within those, but you can't step outside of those. And those, I was in Idaho listening to the Department of Education talk to the state senators saying, well, yeah, by 8th grade, we kind of know where they're going to go, and then their high school experience will be tailored to them. And everybody's nodding their head until I raised my hand and said, how many 13-year-olds even know what physics is? So how could they decide they want to be a physicist if they haven't even, like, what did you know what you wanted to do at 13? Because I sure didn't. And all of a sudden you could see people waking up because it's presented as, well, see, school is workforce development. And so the purpose of school is to develop a workforce. And we take all this data and then we use it to determine, well, your kid's going to be like on the janitorial career path, or your kid can be on the nursing career path, or, and so it's really the German system.
It is.
Which is
It
what they do in
is.
Germany. And that's really kind of where they want to go with it. And we're seeing in a variety of states that's beginning to occur and play out, which is really sort of sad.
It's very sad. I know children that would have been put on this path that would have never become an attorney, a doctor. We don't know what God's going to do with those children. I know they're doing IQ tests all the way through, along with all of the other evaluations. And it should tell us something as parents when the metrics that they're looking at are really more valuable than the math and the science. They're really looking at the behavior and the resilience and the emotional regulation. And those are the soft skills we're being told all our children need to go into the workforce.
Right.
So there's not a lot of importance put on the other.
It's not. Years ago, Pennsylvania gave a test. It was called the Educational Quality Assessment. And it tested a bunch of emotional areas and math and reading. And the critique was, well, the test is too long. So they took the math and reading out of the test. Does that tell you where their priorities are?
Yes. Yes. We don't want critical thinkers. We want people who will follow.
Yes.
And be obedient. So that's unfortunately, but how does the student data increase the commercial value of ed tech companies, even if the data is never sold?
They can use the data to generate curriculum, and it manipulates curriculum to move the population closer to the desired outcomes. So the data helps them to validate their curriculum and mold their curriculum to get the changes that they want. And that makes their curriculum more profitable. And so it's like an entire test population for their curriculum that they can constantly use that student population to monitor. How are we getting the results we need? How do we change it? What do we do? And so it basically uses the kids as guinea pigs.
Yes.
Over and over and over again without them having to pay them. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. So how does all of this data that's being collected, Peg, it's got to be flowing into digital credentials and micro badges and workforce passports. So I would say social credit scores. This is a permanent digital record on our children.
It is a permanent digital record. At this moment, they aren't yet calling it social passport. They're not using those terms. But again, if you go to the Department of Labor, the Workforce Data Quality Initiative, they will tell you in no uncertain terms that they're integrating education data with labor data that follows you the whole way through your life. So we can monitor your actions and your activities and reward and punish who we want.
You're right.
Scary.
It is scary. And so much more that we didn't get to cover this evening. But is there anything else that you would like to add, Peg, that we haven't talked about?
No, I think we gave, unfortunately, people a lot of really bad news. So I think let's let them swallow it and see what they can do with it, and then we'll move forward from there.
I agree. So thank you for being with us. Thank you, everyone that attended the webinar. And we will get this out. It has been recorded. And along with the recording, we'll put the information on how to reach Peg and how to reach Truth in Education. And if you have any issues that you would like someone to help you with, whether it's something you don't understand within the system, if you found that mindfulness interferes with your religious beliefs, we would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening.